Good morning. I'm sorry that it created some hitch to get started. So we'll get started with today's presentation. Just to discuss what we did yesterday. So I just want to go over 1 or 2 minutes on that. So yesterday we talked about the problem of stress analysis, and then we talked about what is the real problem and how do we go about taking it up. So that was actually first part of theory of elasticity. Then we got started with the problem of finite, or rather, how do we solve the problem of stress analysis in particular using the finite element method. So finite element method, there we talked about that the problem really boils down to in determining the displacements at every point of the domain of the body. And in order to do that, what we consider is we simply try to look into the surface. If we try to plot the displacements over the whole domain of the body, say in the vertical direction, keeping the body in the XY plane, then we get a surface which will have curvature in the vertical and X direction. So if you take a plane coinciding with the vertical, with the X axis, then you get a surface and it will have some curvature in the that vertical plane. Similarly, if you consider a plane coinciding with the y-axis, it will have another curvature. So it's a doubly curved surface, to keep it simple. And the problem of stress analysis is to determine the form or equation of this surface, which is really a difficult problem because the surface is a function of both x and y. Similarly, if you try to consider the displacement at every point in the y direction, that will give another surface. Now, when we try to consider discretization or splitting the whole domain into small triangles, as you increase the number of elements, size of the triangle will reduce. And if we just, for the moment, with the discretization of the domain into 8 triangles, if we look into the surface just above the element which is indicated as 1 underscore 1, the nodes are 1, 2, 3. And if we try to look into the surface over that element, it is shown on the right hand side. It's a small patch of surface and it looks like a triangular surface, and its boundary is defined by the boundary of the element, and it's really going to have the doubly curved nature. But then if we try to approximate it by a plane surface, that is like a triangular tile with corners at the above the point 1, then 2 and 3, is a triangular plane, triangular surface. So this surface equation, you see, it can be written just in the simple form that displacement in the vertical direction u is given by alpha 1 plus alpha 2x alpha 3y. It's a equation of a plane. And these constants that are involved in this are called generalized coordinates. Since this equation of this surface is going to be valid over the area 1 to 3, we can now think of its validity at the node number 1, 2, and then 3. And if we indicate that displacements above the point 1 is u1, above the point 2 is u2, and above the point 3 is u3, then it is easy to solve for the 3 generalized coordinates in terms of these 3 displacements. And finally, we have come to the conclusion that it can be written in the form n1, which is a function of x and y, into u1 plus n2, which is again a function of x and y, multiplied by u2, n3 into u3, where n3 is also a function of x and y. And they have the same form. You see, it can be written any of this function can be written that ni equal to ai plus bix plus ciy by 2 delta, wherein these constants are AI, DI, it depends on the corner node coordinates of the three vertices of the triangle 1, 2, 3, and they are given explicitly here. Look at this. I want you to note this point that these constants, so far as the triangle 1 is concerned, with vertices at 1, 2, and 3, these A1 to A3, B1 to B3, C1 constants, that they are dependent only on the coordinates of the three vertices and they are constant. This is very important that the constants that are involved in the expression of n1, n2, n3, they are all constant, same value. And these are called these three functions n1, n2, n3, which are functions of x and y. They are called shape functions. It gives the shape to the surface. That's why they are called shape functions. So in the same manner, if we consider the V surface, it can be also simplified or approximated into a plain triangular tile, and it can be written in the form alpha 4, alpha 5, alpha 6, y. And again, we can find out the generalized coordinates alpha 4 to alpha 6 in terms of the displacements at the three corner nodes V1, V2, V3. And fortunately, the form of these functions are the same as in the case of U. So that's the beauty, and the constants that are involved in the expression of U are the same as in the case of V. And finally, you see that we have the displacement UV at any point within the element or on its boundary is given in this form. So we can write it from the expression that we have written earlier also. See that we have written this expression, that expression number 3 and then the expression number 6. 3 and 6, if we combine, I can write it in the form that UV displacement at any point within the element and on its boundary is given in terms of the nodal displacements of the three corner nodes U1, V1, U2, V2, and up to U3, V3. So this can be written that U at any point, which includes two displacement U and V at a point, is given in terms of the nodal displacements of the three corner nodes U1, U2, U3, V1, V2, V3. So that's the outcome of the approximation of the surface expression, and also using the coordinates of the nodal points we get this simplified relation. And now therefore we could get easily the strains at the point under consideration, which is given here. Epsilon x is delta U delta x, and it is actually nothing but derivative of the three shape functions with respect to x multiplied by the three displacement U1, U2, U3. Similarly, epsilon y is nothing but derivatives of the three shape functions with respect to y multiplied by the displacement V1, V2, V3. So finally, you see the strains at any point within the element are given in terms of the nodal displacements of the three corner nodes. So similarly, shear strain gamma xy, which is also given in terms of the derivative of the shape functions, three shape functions, multiplied by the nodal displacement at the corner nodes. So these are all the three strains are now given. You see, look at this. All the three strains are now given in terms of the matrix here. Three strains at any point is given in terms of the derivative of the shape functions with respect to x and y and the nodal displacements. I want you to look into one interesting point here. You see that this expression for that V matrix, which consists of, you see, this is really shape function matrix. And now when we try to come to write to the strain expressions, you see, strain expression here, it consists of this derivative, first derivative of the shape functions, three shape functions in the x and y direction, and multiplied by the nodal displacements. And therefore, you see that we get the strains at any point in terms of this V matrix. It is called strain displacement matrix. And multiplied by the nodal displacements. And then if we go for the stresses are going to be given by the stress strain matrix, which is D multiplied by strains. So therefore, you see, it is nothing but this product, and this D is the stress strain. I think it is the elastic constants matrix or material property matrix D, and it's given in terms of the material property, modulus of elasticity, and Poisson's ratio. These are all constants, and we would like to show you some interesting point here, which is extremely important for this case. So here, if we look into the expression for this B matrix, I think, let me just take a minute for showing you that. Okay, it comes later. You see that B matrix, if we look into carefully, that B matrix is going to be given by all these constants. So let me just move forward. You see, this B matrix here, it is given. This is the B matrix. This expression 1 by 2 delta multiplied by this. So here you see, just let us look into once more. I would have to show you that. Anyway, what I just wanted to conclude by saying that
Sir, you clicked on a browser.
yeah.
The lowest icon is actually on the right hand side bar is your reader, Acrobat reader. Yes.
Yeah, it is this one, huh?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Sorry.
No problem, sir.
Yeah. So what I wanted to finally tell you is that this B matrix, this one is just going to give you B1, this is going to give you B2, this is going to give you B3, and this is going to give you C1, C2, C3. So finally, you see that it is going to be B1 0, B2 0, B3 0. This is 0 C1, 0 C2, 0 C3, and this is C1 B1, then C2 B2, and C3 B3. So finally, you see that this matrix consists of all constant terms. So therefore, strain at any point within the element, it's going to be a matrix which consists of all constant terms multiplied by the nodal displacements. I think all of you please give your attention. You see, the terms of this B matrix, they are all constants. They consist of B1, B2, B3, C1, C2, C3. B1 is just actually Y2 minus Y3. B2 is Y3 minus Y1, and B3 is Y1 minus Y2. And this delta N1 delta Y, it is nothing but C1. C1 is actually, it is going to be X3 minus X2, and so on. That is C3, C1, C2, C3. So all constants. And these are also C1, B1, C2, B2, C3, B3. So all constant. And therefore, you see the strain at any point within the element are just constant. You see that it does, this matrix B, its terms does not vary with the location of the point that you are interested in. So therefore, the strains within the element, including the boundary, is always constant. And this particular three-noded element is called constant strain triangular element, constant strain triangular element, CST element. So that is one important point about this three-noded triangle, and it was the element first introduced in finite element method. And now, since the B terms are constants, stress actually, you see, strain is constant all over the element, therefore the stresses given by D matrix, material property matrix, which are consisting of all constant terms multiplied by the strains, which are also constant, invariant within the element. So therefore, the stresses within the element are also constant, they don't vary. So this particular element has the typicality that it does not give rise to any variation of strain or stresses within the element. So that's how this is very important. Now let us get started for further discussion. Now the question is, we have got the stresses. So stresses we have got. Now the question is, to create this deformation and the stresses within the element, the question is how much of load that is applied by the surrounding elements on this particular element. So if you just isolate this element, that element number 1, you see it is going to be this triangle. And now the question is, stresses are going to remain constant, sigma x, sigma y, and tau xy. And therefore, we would like to find out what are the loads that are coming on the boundary of this element from the remaining part of the body. And finally, how do they indicate how much they become as forces at the nodal points of the element. So let's find out that since this is the load stress field consisting of sigma x, sigma y, tau xi, which is constant everywhere, therefore, how does that mean? How much stress loads it is going to come up or boil down to at the nodes 1, 2, 3. So I want to have this discussion today. So this is the element, nth element, its node 1, 2, 3 is there, and obviously coordinates of node 1, x1, y1, node 2 is x2, y2, and node 3 is x3, y3. So now let's see how much is the load coming on the node number 1. So that's what is actually written there. In this slide, this is what is going to be discussed now. So let us consider this node number 1. So node number 1, you see that it is having load sigma x stress and tau xi stress, sigma y stress, and so also tau xi. So you have stresses on this portion, which is sigma x tau xi, and on this portion, horizontal portion, it is going to have stresses sigma y and shear stress tau xi. So these distributed stresses boils down to you have some concentrated load at node number 1 and 2. So this is what is shown there. So please, I think all of you try to understand, this is very important. How do they get converted into load at the node 1 and 2? So this is node number 1. So if you consider this node number 1, and let us consider this boundary 1 to 2, and therefore this load that is coming in the x direction, you see that is due to this vertical segment from here to there, and the sigma x stress. And what is that load? It is coordinate of the point y2, coordinate of the point 2, y2 minus y1. The height of this segment is y2 minus y1 multiplied by thickness, that is the area, and sigma x is the stress. So it is y2 minus y1 multiplied by t into sigma x, that is what is the load. And therefore, you see, we can write the load, I can lump half of the load at the node 2 and half of the load at this node 1. So therefore, the load due to sigma x on this segment is going to be nothing but, it is, say, sigma y2 minus y1 into sigma x multiplied by t by 2. So that's the load which comes up because of this stress on this segment, this much. Similarly, you see, I have also load coming up on this, in this direction, because of the shear stress. You see that shear stress is acting on how much area? It is from this to this, and this point has coordinate x2, this point has coordinate x1, so this is x2 minus x1, area is multiplied by t, and the load, which is nothing but due to tau xi, so it is tau xi into x2 minus x1 multiplied by t, and therefore, I would like to put half of that load at this node, half of this load at this node. So therefore, we'll have actually stress, you see, it is x2 minus x1 tau xi and divided by 2. So therefore, that's half of the load which comes up because of the shear stress. So therefore, we have taken care of this load and that load. Now think of it, we have also load coming at this node because of the fact that you see there is sigma x stress on this segment which is from node 1 to node 3. So that is actually in a negative direction. So therefore you see it is nothing but we have y3 minus y1. So y3 minus y1, it is there, y3 minus y1 multiplied by t by 2 into sigma x. So that's the load acting in the negative direction. So that's what it is. So it's written there in the second line. Similarly, if you want to consider the other loads, the other loads are also there because of the fact that this segment 1 to 3 that is having shear stress tau xy. And what is the area? Its area is nothing but x3 minus x1 multiplied by t into tau xy. It is positive direction of x. So therefore you see it is x3 minus x1 in the third line here. It is x3 minus x1 multiplied by t by 2 into tau xy, which is to be actually apportioned to this node. So that's why we have taken care of 3 lines. Now another thing is there. You see that you are also going to have load due to this tau xy acting on this area, which is nothing but x3 minus x1 multiplied by t into tau xy. So therefore we will have to put half of that at this node. So it is in the positive direction. So it is x3 minus x1 here in the third line multiplied by t by 2 into tau xy. So therefore you see that finally what you find, the total load coming in the x direction at node number 1 consisting of these 4 terms. And by the similar process, if you want to consider the vertical direction at the node number 1, I'll have actually load coming to due to sigma y. Sigma y is acting on over the area x3 minus x1 multiplied by t into sigma y, and half of that we should apportion to node number 1. You see that's what is given there. You see it is x second line x3 minus, here it is in this second line x3 minus x1 multiplied by t by 2 into sigma y. So it is a vertical direction. Similarly, we will have contribution in the vertical direction due to this shear stress acting on this boundary, which is nothing but y3 minus y1 multiplied by t into tau xy, and we have to put half of that, and it is vertically down. So therefore you see it is written here in this line. So it is in this line y3 minus y1 multiplied by t by 2 into tau xy. So we have taken these two loads. Now we will also have load due to sigma y acting on this area x2 minus x1 multiplied by t by 2 sigma y. So therefore it is negative direction. So therefore it is y2 minus y1. You see that it is y2 minus y1, and it is multiply. Just 1 second. I'm sorry. It is x2 minus x1 into sigma y, and it is actually acting in the up direction. So therefore we have put that x2 minus x1. So in the same manner, you go on actually taking all the vertical loads. You have 4 segments of vertical load. Vertical load on this point is due to sigma y, and then this is due to tau xy, and on this face due to sigma y, and on in this vertical direction due to tau xy. So 4 terms, and these 4 terms are written there. Finally, if you sum up the load in the node or at the node 1, the load in the x direction consisting of just 3 terms, you see, t by 2 into sigma x, y2 minus y3, plus 0 into sigma y, plus t by 2 tau xi multiplied by x3 minus x2. Similarly, vertical load, if you add up, you see it is going to be t by 2 sigma y x3 minus x2 plus t by 2 tau xi y2 minus y3 minus y2, and plus 0 into xi. No sigma x is there. So it consists of 3 terms. In this case, you have sigma x and tau xi, no sigma y, and in this vertical direction, you have sigma y, no sigma x, plus tau xi. So you can go on doing that process for all the corner nodes, and finally we can write the loads for all the 3 nodes. So first one node, I have these 2 forces acting in the x and y direction. Similarly, if we write the other directions, other nodes, we'll get actually see the uh, 2x, p2x 2y is going to be given by this expression, p2y is going to be given by this expression. So p1x is first expression, p1y would be actually this expression, p2x will be this expression, and then p2y is the last expression. So these four expressions for the two nodes. And let's see the third node. So in the similar manner, I can write the load at the third node. So this is the load in the third node in the x direction. This is the load in the third node in the y direction. So therefore, all this is the form. And finally, when we write all these 6 loads at the 3 nodes, you see, these are the loads. And when we collate them together, it looks like this. It is T by 2 into this matrix, which has 6 rows and 3 columns, multiplied by sigma x, sigma y, and tau psi. So finally, the nodal loads at the 3 nodes, which are indicated as P1x, P1y, P2x, P2y, P3x, P3y, is nothing but T by 2 multiplied this matrix. And this matrix, we can write in the form that this is T multiplied by, if I just put delta in the denominator, multiply by delta again at the numerator. So you get this, then you get this expression converted into Bn transpose multiplied by sigma stress matrix. So this is the thing, that the stress at the nodal points of the element is finally given by T into delta B transpose multiplied by sigma. And if we now substitute the value of sigma in terms of the nodal displacements, you see, we get this. Pn, the loads are nothing but actually it is Bn transpose multiplied by D into B, or B transpose multiplied by D into B multiplied by delta into P multiplied by nodal displacements. So which can be simplified in a short form, that this whole expression from B transpose to T, it is indicated as element stiffness matrix Kn multiplied by Un. So this point is again one analogy I like to give. If you think of a single spring, let's say you just have a single spring which is fixed at one end and the load is applied in the other end. The spring stiffness is K and you apply the load P, then P gives rise to a displacement which is given by P equal to K into displacement. So therefore you see that K is the stiffness of the spring. So in this case, same thing happens. Here you see that when you are applying loads P1 to P1x, P1y, P2x, P2y, P3x, P3y, loads at the corner nodes of the element, it gives rise to displacement which are indicated as U1, U2, U1, U2, U3, V1, V2, V3. It's given by this expression. The nodal load applied gives rise to displacement U1, U2, U3, V1, V2, V3, and there is a multiplier which is called stiffness matrix. And since it is a case of 6 degrees of freedom, when you have a single spring, single degree of freedom, and therefore P load equal to stiffness into displacement, one load, one displacement, so it is one-dimensional equation. Whereas in the case of the triangular element, you have 6 nodes, 3 nodes, but 6 directions of displacement, and therefore you have to apply 6 loads which will give rise to displacement, 6 displacement, which is interconnected by the stiffness matrix, and this is called element stiffness matrix. It's a triangular element, its stiffness matrix is K. So that's what it is. So finally, if you want to now come up that we have number of elements in the domain, any number of elements, n subset E number of elements, then how do you get the global stiffness matrix? You just sum up the load due to each of the element. For each of the element, you have got the nodal loads giving the displacement. So now if you go on actually adding all the load displacement relations, then finally you get a expression like this. This will give you the global loads that at all the nodes, the load in the x and y direction. This is the listing of the nodal loads. That's equal to this expression multiplied by the nodal displacements at the nodes in the domain, and it is finally nothing but this will give rise to the global load. It will sum up to the global loads, which is P, and it is having, if you have actually m number of degrees of freedom, then m multiplied by 1 is equal to stiffness matrix, which has dimension m multiplied by m, and this displacement matrix, which has dimensions m by 1. So that's it. So in a global sense, what is that? It is just like actually multiplication or amplification of the single string system, and it gives you the global displacements related to global loads by the global stiffness matrix. That's why this expression, which is finally one we require in the finite element matrix, how do you get this global stiffness matrix, and then you can really link the global loads applied externally with the global displacements at all the nodes. So this is what is the final outcome of the discretization and the finite element formulations. And once you have, so again, look at this last 3 lines. So global load displacement relation, note here that capital K matrix is called global or overall stiffness matrix for the whole domain. And the P load is the global or overall load vector, and global and overall displacement matrix is U. So this is what it is. And herein the size of the global stiffness matrix is m by m. If you have m number of degrees of freedom, then the size of the global stiffness matrix is m by m, and the size of the load matrix is m by 1, and displacement matrix is also m by 1, but global stiffness matrix is a square matrix of dimensions m by m. I think some physics I would like to give you so that you can appreciate what is this meaning that you try to adapt the element relationship to get the global relationship. What is this? You see here this, we try to take each of the element relations and then go on adding over the number of elements, and we get the global loads, and this side we get the global stiffness matrix multiplied by the global displacement. What is this mechanism? I want to tell you that this stiffness matrix for each of the element, it's a square matrix. In the case of triangular triangle, you have 6 displacements, and the size of the element stiffness matrix is 6 by 6, 36 terms are there. And if you look carefully, that each of the term of this matrix indicates a force in some direction due to displacement in some other directions. So that has attribute. Each term of this element stiffness matrix has attributes, one load direction, one displacement direction. So therefore, each of the elements, each term has some attribute, some load direction and some displacement direction. So when you add up in computer, and also if you look carefully, when you add up, means that you try to bring the terms which have the same attributes, add them together. So when you are trying to blade the global matrix, it means that each of the stiffness matrix terms has 2 attributes, one load direction due to displacement in some direction. So that commonness can be made use of, and you can add them together to get the global stiffness matrix and global load vector and global displacement vector. So that's how it is. And therefore, this stiffness matrix generation is not actually go to writing all these expressions, and you write the software or program to make sure that computer will take element by element and then try to add up the similar terms of each of the element stiffness matrix, and it will give you finally a matrix, global matrix consisting of the total stiffness at for a particular displacement, and that's how it is we get the global stiffness matrix. So it is done in the computer. Nothing is done manually. It's not possible. And now, just to again give you some more understanding, you see that this M means total number of degrees of freedom. How do you get that? If you have NP number of nodes, then M is nothing but in 2 dimensions. It is 2 multiplied by NP. That is the dimension of M, or rather magnitude of M. And where NP is the number of nodal points in the domain. So that's how we get the global stiffness matrix load displacement relations. So now the question is, the further questions that you will have in your mind, how do we get the nodal load vector? You see, most of the cases, let us now try to see how do you get the global load vector. So this is the case we started with. We had this domain which is having the node at the boundary, at the bottom boundary is 1, 2, 4, and at the top boundary is 7, 8, 9. So in this case, global loads are given specifically loads at node 7, it is in the y direction P7, at node 8, global load is P8, in the y direction node P9. So therefore, you see, these are the explicit loads specified. So in this case, you don't have any load on the boundary, let's say in the x direction, node 7, node 3, node 1, and in the vertical side, on the right side, you don't have any load in the vertical direction. Suppose at 4 there will be reaction force, at 6 there is no load, at node 9 in the y direction is P9. So these are there. Just a minute. So you see that the loads in this case are specifically given, and therefore you don't have any difficulty in writing the global load vector. So taking note of this point, you can write the global load vector. So here it is. You see, load vector here, you see, we have to write the loads at all the nodes. And because of the particular problem, you see, you have load at node number 7 in the y direction is, x direction is 0, y direction is P7. At node 8, load x direction is 0, y direction is P8. And at node 9, x direction force is 0, and y direction 9. 9y is P9. So that's all. These are explicitly given. So that's how you get the load vector in this case. And the boundary conditions that are specified here, if you see that the node 1 is fixed in both x and y direction. So therefore we know that there is no displacement going to come up at node 1 in the x direction, and similarly no y displacement at node 1. So u1, v1 is 0, we know a priori. And u4 is actually going to be just free because there is no load. So, but then it is going to develop due to Poisson's ratio effect, and that u4 is not known. We have to determine that. But vertical displacement at node 4 is 0. So therefore v4 is 0. So I think just what I wanted to show. I'll go for the picture and then show you what I was trying to say. So you see, in this case, your loads are specified already. This is P7y is P7, P8y is P8, P9y is P9. And at the node number 1, both u and v are 0. So therefore u1 is 0, v1 was also 0. And then at node 4, you see that node 4, it will displace in the x direction, which has to be determined. So it's an unknown. But vertical load on this is actually going to come up as a reaction force, but then its displacement in the y direction is 0, so v4 is 0. So that's all the conditions in this case. So we make use of this load and the global load displacement relationship. We can solve for the equation, global equations, which we have written earlier, that P global matrix multiplied by stiffness matrix equal to multiplied by displacement matrix. So this can be solved. There are actually 18 displacements, 18 unknowns, and we can solve for them using the specified load and displacement conditions. So that's like finally we get the displacements, and then we can go back to the element level. We can calculate using the nodal displacement. We calculate the strains within the element, each of the element, and then stresses within the each of the element. And this process can be done, and that completes the finite element analysis. Now I think this global displacement and load relation, we can get it also in a different way. You know, this is known as equilibrium approach, and in fact, it is the finite element was actually finally established by considering this equilibrium approach of the civil engineering structures, and that's very simple to understand. But then later on, you see that people showed that that same relationship can be obtained from the potential energy formulation. So energy method to obtain global load displacement relations. How do we do that? So you see that if we try to calculate the energy within each of the elements, so you think of this nth element with nodes, whatever it is, and if we consider a small element of this area, within this area, the strain energy within this area is nothing but half epsilon transpose multiplied by sigma into T into TA. So that's the strain energy. And this expression we discussed in the morning yesterday. And therefore, you see that when we take this, and in this case, the final expression becomes that half UN transpose, that epsilon n transpose is nothing but UN transpose Bn dn, and then the stress is dn Bn into UN and TdA. So this integration, you know, that if we integrate the element in the small element over the whole area of the element, that gives us the total strain energy in the element. And finally, you see that this is nothing but half UN transpose multiplied by Kn into UN. So therefore, the integration of the quantity Bn transpose Dn Bn TdA, that gives you the element stiffness matrix. So finally, total strain energy in the whole body is nothing but strain energy in all the elements. So that's what we sum up, and it gives you finally half UN transpose K into U, where half U transpose multiplied by K into U. So it is the global displacement matrix, global stiffness matrix, global displacement matrix. And total work done by the global forces, it is going to be nothing but just multiplication of the global loads multiplied by the corresponding displacements, which can be written as U transpose multiplied by P. So potential energy of the whole system is nothing but strain energy of the whole system U multiplied by W. And therefore, if we now consider the minimum potential energy principle, what does it mean? That a structure which is undergoing elastic deformation, it deforms in such a way that each node will have displacement in such a way will make the potential energy of the system minimum. So therefore, if we try to make use of this minimization principle, potential energy minimization principle, and we try to take the derivative of the potential energy with respect to each of the displacement, U1, U2, U1, V1, U2, V2, and all the nodes UN, Vn, then finally, we'll get, if you have m number of degrees of freedom, you'll get m equations. M equations, and m equations, it consists of left-hand side m terms, and then you will have actually stiffness matrix multiplied by displacement terms. So by that process, we get again the equations that we have obtained earlier, that Ku, total stiffness matrix multiplied by the displacement matrix, is equal to global load vector. So that's how it is. Again, the same thing, that we got from the equilibrium approach, that stiffness multiplied by displacement is equal to load. By the potential energy principle 2, we get the relationship stiffness multiplied by displacement equal to load. So that's how it is. We get the global equilibrium equations finally. So that's how it is. This is an alternative formulation, and it is also used very frequently to get the finite element equations at the element level and also at the global level. Now, global load vector that I was talking about, how do you construct? You see, this is something, some thinking must be given. How do you get that? So this is what I want to illustrate. You see, suppose you don't have specific load specified at the particular point, then how do you determine the nodal loads? Well, let's think of it, that you have two nodes over a segment of the boundary which is from 1 to 2, and over this portion the boundary loading is actually distributed. If it is equally distributed with intensity P, then how do you actually get that converted into load at node 1 and 2 at the two extremities? So total load over this segment, let's say its length is L, then it is PL. And what is the normal way to go about? Simplest way is that you lump it, half of that at this node and half of that at this node. So therefore, in this case, load which is distributed can be converted into equal load PL by 2 here, PL by 2 at the right node. Suppose the load is linearly varied. So suppose in this case, you have load varying from left end to right end, which has two nodes, 1 and 2. You see here it is P1 intensity, here it is P2 intensity. So you have, if you just, it is consists of uniform distribution P1 and then another linear distribution 0 to P2 minus P1 on the right end. So therefore we can now again actually lump up uniformly distributed load P1L. So it will be P1L by 2 here, P1L by 2 there, and the triangular variation, P2 minus P1 over a span L, I can put P2 minus P1 multiplied by L divided by 3 at this node, and 2/3 of that P2 minus P1 multiplied by L on the right node. So that's what we can do. So that differential load PL by 3 here, 2PL by 3 there, plus we have to add P1 L by 2 here on the left node and P1 L by 2 on the right node. So that's how it is. Now think of it that you don't have the load specifically on the part of the boundary 1 to 2 at the corner node, but somewhere in between. You see, it is capital P acting, and this span is L, and it is at a distance A from node 1, B from node 2. So therefore what we can do, you see, that we can write this thing as, it is at this node it is going to be PB by L at the left node and PA by L at the right node. So that's how it is. It can be put to, you can put actually BL by N at the node number 1 and 2 PL by, or rather actually A PAL by L at the node number 2. So that's how we can go on actually lumping them. So this is the process of converting the boundary load into nodal loads, which are required for solving the finite element equations. Okay, so we have actually, I would sum up because I had to go little faster today because I wanted to show you so many things in this particular lecture. First of all, we were talking about how to get the element level relationship. That is, how do we get the element level node displacement relation? So that was the starting point, and therefore we started with the construction of that relationship from the equilibrium approach. So we finally, of course, started with the consideration that obviously element stiffness matrix is going to link up the nodal loads with the nodal displacements. This is what 11 relationship, and this was actually, we got it by the consideration that the stresses are constant within the element, and therefore we could actually just lump the loads at the nodes over the boundary just distributed load over the boundary. We started with this distributed load over the boundary of an element. We just lump them at the corner nodes of the element, and thereby you got a linkage between the force in x direction and y direction with the stresses within the end element. And finally, when you try to write the total load at the nodes of the element, that gives you the relationship which are explicitly written in this page. So you have at node 1 force in the x direction given in terms of the three stresses, force at node y, at node 1 at the y and the y direction also in terms of the three stresses. And same process is actually there for all the three nodes. And finally, we get the relationships involving the stresses and the nodal coordinates. And that was finally written in the form that this loads, 6 loads at the 3 nodes. At each of the node, there are 2 components, and they can be written in the form of stresses and the matrix B, which is load displacement matrix. I'm sorry, it is actually strain displacement matrix B, and that's how we got the relationship nodal load equal to T into delta Bn transpose, that is strain displacement matrix, multiplied by the stresses sigma x, sigma y, tau x. So this relationship is extremely important. It comes up from the consideration of load at the nodes that are to be applied to generate a displacement at the 3 corner nodes U1, U2, U3 and V1, V2, V3. So this node displacement relationship, it is fundamentally very important in finite element, and you can obtain them from the matrices strain displacement matrix B, stress strain matrix D, and the displacement at the node. So this is what it is, elements to. Then we just did this process, all the elements in the domain, and then when we sum up the forces at all the nodes in the domain, considering all the elements which are sharing that node, we got this summed up process, and thereby we got the global load related to the global displacement, and the connecting matrix is global stiffness matrix. So this is the final relationship linking the nodal loads with the nodal displacements of all the nodes in the domain. Then we talked about how we can get the same expression from the energy method. So therefore, we talked about how do we evaluate the strain energy in each of the elements. Then how do we get the total strain energy, and that finally boils down to the relationship total strain energy is equal to half U transpose KU. I think I want to again give one analogy. In the case of single spring, you see, in the case of single spring which is having stiffness, let's say small k, and displacement is U, the strain energy in the spring, you remember, it was nothing but half KU square. Half KU square. It is nothing but half U transpose KU. And look at this. Total strain energy in a two-dimensional body discretized, total strain energy is nothing but half U transpose KU, half KU square. So this is nothing but strain energy in the whole system, and since herein you have displacements, number of displacements are equal to M, therefore this matrices U has dimension M times 1, K has dimensions M by M, and U of course is M by 1. So therefore this is the energy in the spring which is arising out of finite element distillation. So therefore, it is exactly the same from half KU square, strain energy. And work done is nothing but P multiplied by displacement. Here also you see the work done, it is nothing but in the multidimensional system, it is nothing but P into U. Look at this expression, W work done by the external forces is nothing but U displacement multiplied by P. Since you have the dimension of the matrix, so therefore it is actually written in this matrix form U transpose into P. It is nothing but P into U. In the case of single spring, that's it. So strain energy half K U square, and work done is load into displacement, it is P into U, and we have written it same thing, U transpose into P. So that's all the relationship that comes out from the finite element expression. Then we spend some time in converting the external load specified on the system into nodal loads. In that conversion, we make use of lumping process. It is lumping process is simple. Just actually consider the total load. How do you apportion at the two nodes, considering the static equilibrium? It is just like a beam supported at the two nodes, and the load is acting, and you try to convert them into reactions. Same process is done here. If it is distributed load over span L, then we try to get reaction forces PL by 2, PL by 2. And if it is triangular distribution, then you just actually, in the case of triangular portion, you just put 1/3 at the end where the intensity is 0, and 2/3 at the other end where the intensity is the highest. The same process is done. So we talked about that, and now we would like to say some more points. But let us have some break here and give some time to the participants to ask questions. I think many things have gone above the head. So please tell me, what are the questions you have? Let me pause for a while and then spend some time in explaining your query. Please tell me.
Is Professor Nitin Desai online?
Yeah.
There is one Nitin Desai, he
Yeah.
has asked a question.
Please.
Suppose value of Poisson's ratio is 0.5, then the volumetric strain will be equal to 0 as per given equation. He raised this question when you were dwelling on page number 14, sir. But I don't know which page or which equation he is referring to, so I was asking him whether he was online.
Okay, let me just go to.
I think if he is talking about the elements of the D matrix, that makes the maybe there.
Yeah.
He says that maybe below that. I don't know. You just check that, and he's not online, I guess.
You just repeat the question.
He says that if the Poisson's ratio is 0.5, then the volumetric strain will be 0 in the equation.
Yeah. See, generally, for elastic cases, we never have Poisson's ratio of 0.5. It is always less than 0.5. That is one point.
Yeah.
And if it is 0.5, then it is plastic case, just perfectly plastic case. So that case we are not discussing here at this point. We are not discussing that point here. We are trying to talk about elastic stress analysis.
Okay, sir. Okay.
Yeah.
There is no question written in the chat box. I just want to ask participants if they have any questions. Otherwise, I'll ask one or two questions.
Please. Yeah.
Sir, what I followed while you were explaining, the shape functions and its relationship with the displacement in the x direction.
Yeah.
I just felt that should it be possible for having to have independent shape functions for V and still formulate the problem?
No, you see that unfortunately in this case, it's a two-dimensional problem. So you are taking them integrated. So you are not taking them separately, they are connected. So therefore these shape functions, obviously, of course, the shape functions depends on the shape of the element. And the displacement shape or surface shape is actually specific to the element. So therefore the shape functions which defines the shape of the surface are fixed. They are actually same for x and y displacement. Of course, obviously, two displacements, one can say that I have linear variation in one direction and quadratic variation in other case. So we generally don't separate that. We can try to simply take it to be that it is the highest variation that is there, we take it. And but then if it is actually in the actual case, it is becoming actually less than that, it will automatically come up. A linear variation can easily actually accommodate constant strain. You get my point? You see,
Yeah. That's
quadratic
it.
variation, it will automatically include the linear variation.
Yes.
So
No,
highest
but
variation
what?
will include the lower order variation always. It does
Right.
one does not have to actually worry about it.
Yes, but it appeared from the equations, the flow of the equations, that even if, they were actually different, it would perhaps be possible to proceed further, having one
No, but
surface
then
for U and
no,
another surface for
the
V.
question is that we try to take the surface which is having highest order variation, and that highest order variation, if you take it, lower order variation automatically taken care of. You don't have to worry at all. It comes up.
Okay.
Actual system is giving rise to, let's say, quadratic variation in x direction, linear variation in y direction. Once you have taken the quadratic variation, linear variation will automatically come.
Yeah. But if at all the mathematics permits me that, will that become a different element?
No, this one it's not needed. It's not needed. That makes it actually unnecessarily complicated. It does not actually add to anything. It adds.
Okay.
When you make it same, it becomes easy for formulation. Because in
Okay.
numerical integration, etc., we are taking care of for the whole element consisting of both the directions.
Okay.
Because it is
Yeah.
volume, when you are trying to take area integration, it includes both x and y.
Yeah.
So therefore, it does not actually need that you have to have consideration for x direction, y direction separately.
Okay.
Strain energy is after all consisting of the deformation in the x and y direction.
Yeah. Okay. I got your point, sir.
Yeah,
Perfectly fine.
yeah,
Perfectly fine.
yeah,
Yeah. One more thing I wanted to ask, that as you later on said also, that lumping is in agreement with statical equilibrium of the forces, load lumping I am talking about.
yeah.
Yeah. So is that physically perfect? And when I do it that way, should I say that the physical error because of my modeling is zero? Load modeling, I mean.
No, you see that, of course, it has been proven that the lump load vector always give correct displacements. But
Okay.
rationally, if one has to do, one has to go by what is known as consistent load vector. They are work equivalent. That alternative way is that on a part of the boundary, the work done by the distributed load over the span of the segment should be equal to the work done by the nodal forces at the two nodes of the segment. And therefore, see, this work equivalent, that is what is known as consistency. How you can also put the nodal loads by considering this work equivalent. This work done by the distributed load is equal to work done by the nodal loads. So that is what is called work equivalent or consistent considerations or consistent load vector.
Okay, but what I wanted to ask is, if I actually keep the loads in lumped manner, uh, uh, does that I mean does that reduce the accuracy of the solution?
Now, you see, lumping actually generally gives better accuracy. That's well known.
Okay. Uh-huh.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Because you see
Okay.
that when you do consistent load vector, when you go for consistent evaluation, exact evaluation of the terms of the stiffness matrix, that is also going to give rise to some error. You see, that exact integration is replaced by what you call numerical integration. So which is better?
Then this energy balance of the
Yeah.
work done by external forces and the loads that the corresponding nodes are going to inflict, how does that improve the way of doing it?
No. Yeah, so the question is that you have certain error in the finite element approximation itself. And when you are trying to put the lump loads, that is also, it is an approximation after all. So these
Yeah.
two approximations finally sort of annul out and give the results correct. That's all.
Yes, yes, I got it. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Any other questions, participants?
Yeah, please. I think come up. I am feeling bad that you are not asking questions. It is as if actually it is just like black box. I talk and nothing comes out of it.
Good morning, sir. This is Dr. Richa Agrawal. I posted my question, but basically I just thought that I should just unmute and ask you.
Please.
Yeah, a query which I have is, we generally say that the shape functions varies from 0 to 1. But I think that can the shape function value will be, or a shape function magnitude will be negative at any instance?
No, you see, that's not needed. You see, that's not needed. You see, basically that if it is, after all, what, that you are trying to write the shape functions whose variation is having, let's say it is associated with node 1 is, that n is having value 1 and 0 at other nodes. Get the point?
Yes,
So therefore, you see that if it is negative, suppose the displacement is negative at some point, obviously its contribution will automatically, because your total expression is what? U equal to N1 U1 plus N2 U2 plus N3 U3. So if N1 is having some value negative or displacement is having value negative, it will automatically take care of it.
Sir, actually, why this question came into mind in my mind is, we generally, when we draw the variation of a quadratic or cubic shape function, we show that it is going in the negative direction. With here. So that just came into my mind that when we draw that variation of n1, n2, and n3, we show that it is going in the negative direction. And we say that it is varying from 0 to 1. So that's why I always have a confusion that can it be negative value? Because whenever we solve the problem, we always get positive values of all the shape function, and the sum is coming out to be 1. So,
yeah. No, you see that cubic shape functions, cubic means actually it is having, you are going to have actually 4 nodes at the, over the part of the boundary, right?
Yes, yes, sir, yes, sir.
Yeah, so therefore when you draw, it is just, you simply conveniently, you try to show that it is going in a negative direction, but automatically, sum of the shape functions at any node, at any point in the system is 1.
Yes, sir, yes, sir.
Yeah, so that remains, that's what is important.
Okay, sir. Thank you a lot, sir. Thank you.
That's for illustration, we draw that, but then ultimately, sum of the shape functions at any, over the element, any point over the element is 1.
Yes, sir, yes, sir. Yes,
Thank
sir.
you.
Thanks a lot, sir. Thank you, sir.
Okay, so we have.
Sir, excuse me.
Yeah.
There are 2 questions in the chat box. One is that can you tell us when to use CST and when to use LST and linear strain triangle? And the second question is, can you suggest a good book for finite element analysis? Thank you.
There are actually umpteen number of books. You see that Desai and Abel, that was the first book. Zinkiewicz was the second book in the global market. And then, R.D. Cook came, and then Reddy came, then Chandraputla Reddy came, and Martini, and all. I mean, if you just look into the literature, it will be actually hundreds of books are there. So many other people have also written books. So many Indian authors have also written books. So that's not a problem. But I think in general, you see that R.D. Cook is a good book. Zinkiewicz is actually a little difficult for the beginners. And then Chandraputla Reddy is a quite simple book to get started with. So therefore, there are many books in the market.
Okay, the other question that someone else has asked is, when will you recommend us to use CST and when LST?
Yeah. See, CST element is the most simple element, and it is also useful in elastic plastic analysis. So that's how it is. And you get the results, in all the cases, and you must get the discretization. Look at this. If you are thinking of, you have a field variation of displacement is, let's say, quadratic, and then if you try to make use of the constant strain triangular element, which is having linear variation, obviously to approximate that, you must make use of actually, instead of 2, if you want to use one single element, linear element will take care of a particular span. But then If you want to take CST element, you have to take minimum 2 elements. So therefore, that's the process. If the situation demands that you have a linear variation in the field, then better to go for linear element. And it is cubic, you must go for cubic element. That's the way it is. So one has to actually test what sort of field variation the variable has. Accordingly, decide the element, and that will give you the way to tackle the problem.
Okay, sir, that's it.
Yeah. So we'll last part of the segment, like this lecture is really, we talked about that CST element, constant strain triangular element. That means we approximated the surface. If you remember that picture which I had showed you, that the actual surface is doubly curved. You see, doubly curved. So it could be actually a doubly curved surface over the patch of the element. So here you see that the surface is doubly curved. Now, if you want to have actual surface model, then you should go for higher order variation of the element variation. So you should make use of actually not the constant linear variation. You should go for quadratic variation, cubic variation. So therefore, to approximate this surface, one can think of the least that one can think of, it is linear variation. Then one can go for I beg your pardon, it is linear variation of the displacement field. Then one can think of quadratic variation of the displacement field and cubic variation and so on. So the polynomial that you select is going to really help you to approximate the actual variation of the field. And if you want to go for higher order element, then obviously you see that if you have a triangle, let's say this triangle, a typical triangle, it has actually a surface which is really not linear. It is actually doubly curved surface. So how do you approximate it? You can get started by approximating it as a linear surface, therefore triangular tile. But the next higher order variation that you can think of it is a quadratic surface. It can be a polynomial in x and y. So therefore, you see, it's like this. Quadratic variation is alpha 1 plus alpha 2x, alpha 3y plus alpha 4x square, alpha 5xy, alpha 6y square. So in this case, you see, you can write a polynomial which is quadratic. It's certainly a better variation for approximation. Now, if you want to do so, then element, you must have number of elements associated with the element so that all the generalized coordinates, 6 generalized coordinates alpha 1 to alpha 6 can be evaluated. So therefore, you see that your number of nodes that are involved with the element boundary has got to change. So this is what it is. You take 6 nodes, you can have actually 6 u displacement, 6 v displacement, and therefore you have a choice of second order polynomial for the triangle, and it involves actually 12 generalized coordinates, alpha 1 to alpha 6 with the u function. Similarly, for the v functions also, we'll have another 6 generalized coordinates. So this is what it is, quadratic element. So it's a quadratic polynomial. You can write for both x and y. So also we can write for v also similar way. So v, we can also write a similar polynomial. And in that case, you see, we can write u displacement as n1 u1 plus n2 u2 plus n6 u6. And by similar procedure as in the case of CST, you can write v also in terms of the 6 displacements at the nodes of the element n1 v1 up to n6 v6. So therefore, you see that this is what is the linear variation or linear element, and or rather quadratic variation of the field, and we have the displacement within the element, including the boundary, is given by this U matrix is equal to B matrix N matrix, capital N matrix, step function matrix, multiplied by the 12 displacement. So therefore, you see here the displacement at any point is U and V. 2 by 1 is the dimension of the left hand side matrix, column matrix, and this N matrix, shape functions matrix is 2 by 12, and the displacement matrix is 12 by 1. So that's how it is. And by the routine procedure that we have followed earlier, strain matrix is going to be given by this, and which finally boils down to a matrix which will have actually, you see that you are going to have 12 rows and 12 columns. You see, this is going to have 12 rows and 12 columns because you have 12 displacements here. So this gives you strain matrix is equal to Bn multiplied by Un. This is Bn is strain displacement matrix multiplied by displacement. Now I want to ask you one question at this point. When you have taken a displacement variation which is quadratic, and the first derivative that you get, what sort of form it will have? What will be the order of variation of the strains in this case? So please, I want actually all of you to concentrate and tell me answer that if you are trying to talk about the quadratic variation of displacement field, then the first derivative of the displacement, what sort of variation it would have? Yes, if you take the derivative of u with respect to x, what sort of variation you will get?
You may unmute and answer, please. Participants, you may unmute and answer.
Yeah.
Yeah, one Yogesh Yenarkar has answered that it should be linear.
That's great. So that's
Yes.
what it is. You know, say once you take the derivative of u with respect to x, you are going to get certainly 2 alpha 4x, and then it is alpha 5 into y, and rest of the things will be actually as before. So therefore, you see that quadratic polynomial, it gives a strain variation which is one order less, linear variation. Similarly, if you try to take the derivative of u with respect to y, it is going to have linear variation in y. So that's the way it is, that when you try to take the field variation quadratic, your strain variation is going to be linear. So it's not constant. Unlike the case of CST element, in this case, strain within the element is not going to remain constant. It will depend on the location of the point. So that's what it is. So that is linear strain triangle. You see, little while ago, some participant asked the question, linear strain triangle. So that's how, this is the case of linear strain triangle. And finally, with this starting, finally you can get the stress matrix, which is also going to have linear variation. And finally, element stiffness matrix is going to have this expression always Bn transpose into Dn multiplied by Bn T into Dn. Yeah, here also some point which is important to be remembered is that in this case, when you are trying to integrating, in the case of CST element, three-noded element, we had all the terms of B is constant. So therefore, in this integration, it was simply integration over the area dA. So this stiffness matrix involved integration just dA, area integration, that is the area integration, and because rest of the terms are constant. But in this case, since Bn consists of terms which are varying linearly with space variables x and y, you are going to have actually integration for the whole expression. So which makes the evaluation little difficult, and it means that you have to do the hand multiplication of the matrices and then evaluate term by term, which is costly. So in order to ease the process, we go for doing the integration numerically. That's why in finite element numerical integration is very important, because of the variation of the matrix terms in which space it is to be done exactly, and then it will have actually cost involvement. But to reduce the computational cost, the exact integration is replaced by numerical integration. So you might have some lecture on numerical integration later. All right, so that's it. So this is quadratic variation or linear strain triangle that we have talked about, and we can go on actually talking about higher order variations and so on. Finally, the convergence requirement, which is the last element I wanted to talk about. See, you say that finite element results, if we have to get good results, we have to refine the discretization. That means we go on making the size of the element less and less so as to approximate the surface better. And therefore, the question is that as you go on doing this refinement, infinitely, does it actually guarantee that you are going to have your results converge to the exact solution? Yeah, that's what is actually there. What are the conditions that are to be SEO, that are to be guaranteed so that your convergence is SEO? Or what are the conditions to be actually included so that your convergence on refinement of the discretization is guaranteed? So they are called convergence requirements. So these requirements are a couple of them. So I wanted to just talk about them, spend the last part of the lecture on that. So first thing is that convergence requirement. One thing is that the polynomial that you select for the displacement variation should be symmetric. It should not have any bias with respect to any coordinate. So if you have second degree variation in the x direction, you must have second degree variation in y direction. So when you are trying to write a polynomial, you see that u equal to alpha 1 plus alpha 2x, alpha 3y plus alpha 4x square plus alpha 5xy, alpha 6y square. You see, this says it is a polynomial which is having second degree variation in both x and y direction. But if you had written u equal to alpha 1 plus alpha 2x plus alpha 3y plus alpha 4x square, suppose you write that. So in this case, you see that you have a quadratic variation in the x direction, but you have a linear variation in y direction. So this is not good, you see, this is not permitted. You have a bias, you have a quadratic variation in the x direction, but linear variation in y direction. This is not permitted. So in order to do that, for the higher order variation of polynomial, you see this Pascal triangle is very useful. This Pascal triangle, you see, first is rigid constant term 1, then linear term in x and y, that is second row, then third row consists of x square, xy, y square, then fourth row consists of x cube, x3, x2, y, xy square, y cube. So this is a polynomial. When you take the terms from this Pascal triangle, when you select a term from the left of the triangle, you must select the corresponding term from the y side also, from the center line. So this is what is the point that you have to follow writing the polynomial variation. You must write the symmetric polynomial. It should not have any bias in one direction. So this is first thing. So example, you see that I have written linear polynomial. You see it is equally biased. Then quadratic variation, you see it is equally biased. And cubic polynomial, look at this, cubic polynomial. I think here in this example is quite important. Look at the cubic polynomial. You see, cubic polynomial, if you wanted to make the full polynomial inclusive of all the terms, then you must have 10 nodes because you have 10 generalized coordinates, alpha 1 to alpha 10. It consists of all the terms from zero order term to y cube term. Similarly, v is also of the same type. But look at the fourth order polynomial. I will written next. You see here, u is equal to alpha 1 plus alpha 2x plus alpha 3y plus, it continues, then alpha 10y cube, alpha 11x4, and then alpha 12y4. You see, in this case, up to actually 10th term, cubic terms, it is a complete polynomial. Then we have gone for actually taking x4, then y4. Both are actually on the two sides of the vertical line. So therefore, it's a symmetric polynomial. It's good. But suppose you try to take one term, not the corresponding term from the other side. So I think I wanted to show you that. Suppose in this fourth order polynomial, you simply had complete polynomial up to 10th term, which is alpha 10 y cube, and then suddenly actually you simply limit to alpha 11 x4, not the alpha 12 y4. So therefore, this is just a quintic. It is actually fourth order variation in x, but then cubic variation in y. So that's not good. So that's not permitted. So you must be careful while selecting the polynomial expressions and the terms. One important point, you see that number of nodes that are to be associated with the element depends on the number of nodes associated with the element. So if you are trying to say that you will have actually 10 nodes with the element, then in that case you must select actually polynomial which will have actually 20 generalized coordinates, 10 with the x direction, 10 with the y direction. So that's how the guideline for selecting the polynomial and the number of nodes associated with the element. All right. So you say, look at this polynomial. For this polynomial, look at this. What is this? Can participants just think for a while and tell me what is the difficulty of this polynomial? What is the difficulty? Is it quadratic in the x direction?
Yes, sir.
What about y direction?
It is not.
Yeah. So that's how it is. In this case, you see, it is not symmetric. It is not ensuring symmetry. So therefore, it is not good. So you must not actually have this sort of selection. It will misbehave. So that is what is one of the aspects of the polynomial constructions. So I have more example in the write-up. So please look into it. The other requirements of the convergence conditions are this. Rigid body mode. This is very important. These three requirements are extremely important for finite element analysis. The first one is rigid body mode. Then second one is constant strain conditions. And then you see that last is continuity conditions. Continuity conditions. So these three conditions I'll spend time now. So let us talk about rigid body mode. So when you are selecting the polynomial, you see, you must ensure that if the body is moving like a rigid body, you know, think of it, you shift a structure from one point to another, you don't have to actually apply any load. And obviously, you know, in those cases, to ensure that rigid body mode, you have to make sure the polynomial selection is done properly. In order to do that, when you're writing the polynomial, the constants like all the expressions that I have written, you see there used to be a constant associated in the x direction alpha 1, then in the y directions alpha 5. These are not having any polynomial expression. So these are actually ensuring rigid body mode that gives the same displacement to all the nodes irrespective of its coordinate. So that's what is very important. This term must be included in the selection of the polynomial. You cannot avoid that. Then in that case, you see, if you have this sort of conditions, you know, if you have this sort of conditions, then you might have, if you have a situations that where there is local heating of the body, there will be deformation. And if you don't include this rigid body mode, the body, you know, the deformation will become actually not reproducible by the polynomial that you have selected. So in the case of non-uniform stress spin, particularly thermal stress problem, etc., this element will misbehave. So you must have the terms like constant terms involved in the polynomials. Constant strain conditions. In particularly two-dimensional problem, you know that as you refine the element, finally the condition that comes up on highest refinement is constant strain condition. Each element has no variation in strain. So that's the condition which comes up on refinement. So your polynomial must be selected such that that conditions can be reproduced by the polynomial. And in order to do that in two dimensions, if you remember, you know that the terms which gives rise to constant strain is nothing but the epsilon x expression, epsilon y gamma given by the first derivative of displacement. So therefore you must have the linear terms. You cannot select a polynomial like this, u equal to alpha 1, then alpha 2 x square plus alpha 3 xy. You cannot have it, you know, you must have also the linear terms. that alpha 2x plus alpha 3y, these terms must be there. These linear terms assure the constant strain condition in the two-dimensional analysis. So therefore, constant strain condition must be satisfied by taking the linear terms in the case of two-dimensional analysis. You see, it depends on the type of, if you are trying to talk about plate bending, there the requirements are different. Depending on the problem, it will vary. But in the case of two-dimensional stress analysis, your constants terms involving linear terms like alpha 1 plus alpha 2x plus alpha 3y, this alpha 2x plus alpha 3y, they assure the constant strain condition. And then lastly, that last condition that must be satisfied is nothing but inter-element compatibility. I think that constant strain conditions, why it is also to be assured is for the simple reason that when you are calculating the total strain, I'm sorry, just let me come to this point in between. Now itself, then we'll go to compatibility conditions. See, the total strain energy is nothing but epsilon transpose multiplied by sigma TdA integration. And you see that when you try to do this integration, if it is actually constant strain conditions, then in that case, you see epsilon terms will become constant, all terms will become constant, stresses will be constant. And this integration, to have the exact evaluation, what you need is the area integration. So to have the area integration, your numerical integration that is to be adopted will dependent on the integration of the area of the element. So that can be done if the strains are constant. This is simply the least order of integration that is decided by the area integration or volume integration in 3 dimensions. Now the last condition, inter-element compatibility. See, the polynomial that you select, it must ensure inter-element compatibility. I think let me go back that the surface that we are talking about in two-dimensional analysis, it's a doubly curved surface. So when you try to break the domain into small elements, then you see we are breaking that surface, doubly curved surface, into patch of triangular plates. So patch of triangular plate in the case of linear variation of displacement field. And when you are doing that, you see, you must ensure that at the inter-element boundary, look at this, in this case, I have shown in the sketch element 1 and 2, which are having a common boundary BC, and the two nodes which are actually A at the left end and D at the other end. So therefore, they are Harap nodes. So what happens is that these displacement surface for the two elements, two triangular patches or tiles, must make sure that displacement along this common boundary must have the same variation. If the variation of displacement for the element 1 is linear, for the element 2 also should be linear. Otherwise, there will be mismatch. There will be, suppose your left hand end is actually having quadratic variation, right hand end is having linear variation, then it will be mismatch. There will be crack. The variation for the element number 1 will be, let's say, quadratic, and the element 2 will be linear. So therefore, there will be mismatch. A crack will come up. Physically, there is no crack in the continuous surface. So therefore, that's actually something must be ensured that the variation at the common boundary must be the same from the two ends. So along the boundaries, when you try to take the linear variation of the displacement field, you see from B to C, we plot the U displacement, the variation is linear. So whether you take the left element or right element, this variation, since displacement at node B is UB and displacement at node C is UC, it's a linear variation, straight variation from both left element and right element. This is same, and this is compatibility. You must ensure compatibility. Otherwise, if you just try to say that I will have the left element quadratic, right element linear, then there will be incompatibility, and you will introduce crack in the body, in the finite element discretization, and therefore that's not going to actually converge to the exact solution. So this is what is compatibility conditions. So once you ensure these compatibility conditions on defining the elements and discretization, you are guaranteed that your results will be converged to the exact solutions. So that's what it is. And I think actually I wanted to talk about all this in my lecture. I'm sorry, I think you always actually first time lecturing on this presents difficulty for the newcomers, and therefore, unfortunately, we had to cover some material so that you have, even if you have understood something, also let's say 20% of whatever I have taught, it's quite good. And I wish you all the best and make use of the finite element analysis in your life, in practice. Thank you very much. All the best.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much, sir.
Please, no.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah, thank you.
Yes, I will just, thank you in a minute and then we'll close the session formally. Dear participants, when I first contacted Professor Maiti with the request of, helping me in taking a couple of lectures on finite element method, he was then not in good health also. But then in spite of his health problems, he immediately accepted my invitation and then, he was ready to deliver these sessions. Further, during this period when I requested him, it is all of you know that it is actually lockdown period due to COVID, because of which Professor Maiti is in Kolkata, as I told you yesterday. But in spite of all odds in the existing situation, he has helped us. He helped me particularly, and in general, my institute by delivering these sessions to all of us. So. I, on behalf of me and my institute, my department also, I thank Professor Maiti for his interesting sessions. I hope all of you have benefited from it and you will continue your journey in the direction of learning finite element method further. Thank you very much. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Good day, sir.
Thank you. We'll talk later.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Dear participants, we are meeting for the next session at around 11:30. Dr. Nilesh Raikar, Professor SPCE, will deliver his lecture at 11:30. So, I request you to join at 11:30 so that we'll be able to finish exactly at 1 o'clock as per our timetable. Thank you so much.